Katoa. Ka tū tēnei ki te mihi atu ki a koutou, ko tata mai. Nau mai, haere mai whakatau mai. Haere mai koutou ki tēnei whenua, ki tēnei whare wānanga, ki tēnei me ki tēnei kaupapa o te rānei. Nau mai, whakatau mai. Ahakoa, ko wai, ahakoa no hia. A tēnei te mihi mahana atu ki a koutou. Tiki I tēnei wā ki te mihi atu ki a rātou kua whitiraki tia I te rāwiki. Karehe kupu, karehe kōrero. Engari I roto I tō tātou nei tikanga, ko te mea tika ki te mihi atu ki a rātou, haere koutou ki te wā kaika, ki te kāka tuturu. Ka huri ka mihi anō ki a tātou nei te kānohi ora tēnā rā tātou. Kia ora, greetings, welcome. It's a privilege and an honour to be able to stand and welcome you here, firstly on behalf of the local people, the mana whenua, but also on behalf of the university. My name's Tuari and I work in the Office of Māori Development. Going to begin, I'm going to say a few words right at the end, but I'd now like to invite our karaua, Hata, just to begin this session with a karakia. Kia ora.
Tuatahi rā kai te mihi tanu I te mana whenua. Nō reira I tēnei wā kia whakarite hiara te arawhata mō tātou ki te runarawa. So let us pray. E hua te matua te tamatu wairua tapu, nei rā tāu puru nei tōtu nei ki moi tōu waruwaru I te tuku whakamoimiti atu ki a koe mō tēnei hui nā māta. Ki noa rā ki tēnei mini na kua taimani I tēnei rā e tō mātau atua I te whakarite rai nā hua tana katoa I nā whakaparahako kai waene nui a mātau e tō mātau atua puta noa I te ao. Nō reira kai tēnoi kai te tangi atu ki a koe ki arahi ia mai mātau e koe roto I a mātau kupu kōrero mō tēnei rā. Kia tau tonu te rani māria ki waene nui a mātau, kia kore tētahi e ata whai ki tētahi anō e tō mātau atu. Koe nera ka inoi ka tangi atu kia koe tō mātau atu, kia haere tonu koe ki mua ki muri ki nā taha o mātau hei arahi, inoi wēnei kaupapa e tō mātau atu. E hua arataki na mātau I au huarahi mea e koe I hua te atu a kārau. Kia haere re tonu koe ki waene nui a mātau kia tapatahia I o mātau nākau kia koe. Nā te mea kōkōrero ke tea koe noa te tīmatana rā no te ao. Gloria ki tō inua tapu. Amen.
It is now my honour to invite our Vice-Chancellor to speak. I am frequently called on to introduce Harleen and have been to many occasions and events where the huge list of accomplishments and achievements and letters have been read out in reference to Harleen's international status in research and all of the other amazing things she's done. But I always refer to Harleen as, from my perspective, having a huge heart, and that all of that intellect and all of that knowledge is filtered through a very, very big heart and a huge concern for people. So again, it's an honour to invite Harleen to address us. Kia ora.
Enga mana, enga reo, enga tā wera pumanawa, ro rakatira ma, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Nō reira, ko waio, ko Harleen Hain tako ingoa, ko te tumuaki o te whariwanaka o Otago aho. Nā mihi nui kia koutou, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Morena, everyone. As you know, my name is Harleen Hain, and I am the Vice-Chancellor here at the University of Otago. I'd like to begin this session by acknowledging the enormity of what we are all facing. Last week, a senseless act of terrorism on members of the Christchurch Muslim community has left that community reeling. It has also left others around the country feeling threatened, unsafe, frightened, and insecure. It has also opened old wounds for Māori, who know all too well about the tyranny of racism in Aotearoa. Now, little did we know when we scheduled this event late last year that its significance would be so poignant for our country and for our university. So I am very proud to be here today to highlight the University of Otago's commitment to the Give Nothing to Racism campaign and to mark the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Here at Otago, we are a community that embraces diversity. We have people here from all over the world. We respect all cultures, all religions, all kinds of sexual orientation and identity. Prejudice of any kind is completely antithetical to our values. At the beginning of each year, I challenge our incoming first-year students to act like a superhero. I encourage them to call out bad behavior when they see it, to call out racist and sexist and prejudicial remarks of any kind. I require them to call out anyone whose words or actions hurt someone else's feelings, to call out people who put themselves or others or our environment at risk. Today, I extend that challenge to all of us, students, staff, members of the wider Dunedin community. It is now time for all of us to act like a superhero. We must collectively make the commitment to give nothing to racism. It's now my pleasure to introduce an actual superhero, the Chief Human Rights Commissioner, Professor Paul Hunt. Professor Hunt studied law at both Cambridge and Waikato. He's lived and worked around the world, including in Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and New Zealand. He has served as an independent expert on the UN Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. He's advised the WHO Assistant Director General. He was a member of the statutory public inquiry into emergency health care established by the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission. He was a member of the advisory group on human rights leadership established by the First Minister of Scotland. And we are very lucky now to have him as the Human Rights Commissioner here in New Zealand. So please join me in welcoming Paul to give his lecture, The Courage of Our Convictions. Ngā mihi nui ki koutou, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Ko Ranganui, ko Papatūānuku, te merai tangata o te ao. Maringi noa te wai, I aku kamo, mo te parikura nui ki Otoa tahi. Talofa, malo e lele, Pacific greetings, salam alaikum. Vice-Chancellor, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Mayor, Director of Office of Maori Development, ko matua hata, other luminaries, staff and students. And I wish to acknowledge Ngāi Tahu. Three of us from the Human Rights Commission were in Christchurch within hours of the massacre. Our aims were modest: to demonstrate solidarity, to listen, and to provide practical support when requested, and it was requested, and we did our best to provide it. Some stories were unspeakably harrowing. Over 3 days, we spent time in the hub, which was organized to support the affected Muslim communities. The hub was busy. It provided a range of services such as health services, legal services, police, and other support services. And it also provided food and places for prayer. The media were not allowed into the hub, and I feel it's not right for me to provide a journalistic account of our experiences, but I would like to make a few short observations. We encountered a sense of unity across the affected Muslim communities, Tangata Whenua, Mana Whenua, and the people of Christchurch. The Muslim communities did not have a bad word for New Zealand, just the reverse. Despite everything, they love the place. Despite their trauma and exhaustion, they demonstrated enormous dignity. While the elders were pillars of strength, the young people were remarkable, dynamic, smart, inspirational. We were told that long-term support and solidarity is essential, not gadfly interest here today and gone tomorrow, but a commitment to the long haul. And that is the backcloth against which I'd like to make a few remarks for Race Relations Day 2019. My remarks, of course, only scratch the surface of a few of the relevant issues. And I hope to dig more deeply on other occasions. Friends and colleagues, New Zealand has one of the best human rights records in the world. However, look across the globe. The competition is not great, is it? We are a richly diverse multicultural society based on the Maori Crown partnership established by the Treaty of Waitangi. Aotearoa welcomes people from all religions, all ethnicities, all backgrounds. For many of us, it's a very fine place in which to live. New Zealand is a well-established democracy, and it should have the maturity to recognize it has major human rights problems. Just a few weeks ago, Minister of Justice Andrew Little flew to Geneva and presented New Zealand's human rights report card to the apex human rights institution in the United Nations. And here is one short quotation from the minister's very thoughtful human rights survey. He said this: "The impacts of colonization continue to be felt today through entrenched structural racism and poorer outcomes for Maori." It's a powerful statement. If the Minister of Justice can be this candid about New Zealand's human rights situation, so must everyone else. I took up the post of Chief Human Rights Commissioner a few weeks ago, and as some of my colleagues will testify, I felt a sense of complacency in New Zealand about the country's human rights situation. Because of last week's attacks, I hope that complacency has now evaporated. It's no longer treasonable to ask, what are New Zealand's major human rights problems? What are they? One, ladies and gentlemen, is poverty. There are unacceptable levels of poverty in New Zealand, and poverty is a human rights issue. poverty is also highly relevant to Race Relations Day because people of colour are disproportionately represented in the poverty data. This afternoon, here in Otago, I begin the first of a number of visits which have been planned since January. And these visits will be taking place over the next weeks and months. And they're designed to enable me to listen and learn from people and communities affected by the impacts of poverty and inequality. And this exercise is driven by a holistic understanding of human rights. Equality, non-discrimination, civil and political rights, economic, social and cultural rights, the right to a safe environment, the rights of Indigenous peoples. My host this afternoon is the Corstorphine Community Hub, and if you're in the room, I look forward to visiting you later. Another major human rights problem in New Zealand, apart from poverty, is racism. Another is Islamophobia. Of course, there are plenty of other human rights problems in New Zealand. Nonetheless, given the catastrophe in Christchurch last week, my remarks will focus on racism, Islamophobia, and related issues. I will leave poverty and other issues for another occasion. Of course, racism and Islamophobia are not the same thing, but they are closely related. And sometimes in my remarks, I will elide between them while recognizing they are distinct phenomena. The calamity in Christchurch demonstrates that New Zealand's geographical isolation does not protect us from violent, transnational, neo-fascist ideology. For a long time, Professor Paul Spoonley from Massey University has warned about the white supremacist nationalist politics festering in some parts of New Zealand. Susan Devoy, our former Race Relations Commissioner, has graphically described how the Muslim community in New Zealand has experienced hatred and abuse in recent years. In the shadow of the Christchurch attacks, Anjum Rahman of the Islamic Women's Council of New Zealand explains that for years, Muslim representatives knocked on every door they could. They spoke at every possible forum, and they pointed to the rise of the alt-right in New Zealand. Shaking with rage, she writes, "We warned you, we begged, we pleaded." While I was in Christchurch a few days ago, there, as you know, in solidarity with the Muslim community, I saw myself a large swastika painted in the middle of a busy road. It was daubed there within hours of the attacks on the nearby mosques. How can we resist this virulent right-wing extremism? First, we have to recognize it exists. And please excuse me, but don't argue. The coward killer was from outside. That this was an Australian problem that we don't have. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a problem. It's manageable. We can sort it, but it's a problem. It exists. Having recognized it exists, we have to shout from the rooftops that we will never compromise our commitment to diversity, to respect, to dignity and equality. And these values lie at the heart of our multiculturalism, which, as already mentioned, is based on the Maori Crown Partnership established by the treaty. Crucially, these values are embedded in legally binding national and international human rights standards. And it seems to me we must urgently refresh and reaffirm those human rights for our modern times. We have to ensure that human rights are confined neither to the halls of the United Nations nor to the courts of any judicial system. They're not confined there. Human rights are not the preserve of lawyers. At root, human rights are about ensuring a secure, safe, dignified life for all. Human rights are concerned with the everyday lives of all individuals and all communities in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Human rights require that space is available for the active and informed participation of disadvantaged or vulnerable communities, whether Muslims in Christchurch or those struggling to have a decent life anywhere in these islands. No public figure, no commentator should ever use language that disrespects any of our diverse communities, including religious groups, ethnic communities, tangata whenua, Pacific peoples, immigrants and refugees, disabled people, women and girls, and members of the rainbow community. And friends, this is not political correctness gone mad. This is a matter, as we have learnt, this is a matter of life and death and human rights. Disrespectful words and actions give permission for discrimination, harassment, and violence. We need a mature discussion about internet and social media companies which disseminate hatred through their platforms. A couple of days ago, the Prime Minister put it like this. She said this: "We cannot simply sit back and accept that these platforms just exist and that what is said on them is not the responsibility of the place where they are published. They are the publisher, not just the postman. There cannot be a case of all profit, no responsibility," said the Prime Minister. Companies not only have responsibility, as the Prime Minister rightly put it, they also have human rights responsibilities. Of course, the primary human rights duty bearer is the state and its agents. That's clear. But for some years now, member states in the United Nations, including the state of New Zealand, member states working in the United Nations, including New Zealand, have recognized that transnational corporations and other business enterprises have human rights responsibilities. After all, some transnational corporations wield far greater public power than some states. So why should such companies escape human rights responsibilities and the corresponding accountability? If you listen carefully, you may hear the sharpening of knives, because these facts that I mention and the arguments that I'm making, they're not popular in some quarters, but I'm only applying to the internet and social media companies some of the mainstream human rights thinking in the United Nations. A sensible discussion about our current hate speech laws is long overdue. The main laws covering hate speech in New Zealand are found in the Human Rights Act and in the Harmful Digital Communications Act. These laws have to be interpreted in the context of the New Zealand Bill of Rights, which affirms the right to freedom of expression. But this legal framework, it seems to me, has grave anomalies. For example, the Human Rights Act prohibits the incitement of disharmony on the basis of race, ethnicity, colour, or national origin, but it does not cover incitement for reasons of religion, gender, disability, or sexual orientation. Why on earth not? Why does the law prohibit incitement of hostility against someone because of their race or colour, but not because of their religion? Not because of their sexual orientation, or because they have a disability? It's not rocket science. It's very simple. Every member of our community should feel safe. Nobody should be permitted to incite hostility because somebody else has a different religion, or because they have a partner of the same sex, or because they use a wheelchair. Of course, we need vigorous debate about controversial issues, and of course, sometimes we will offend people or we will be offended. And that is part of the robust exchange of ideas in a democratic society. But this does not mean we can use freedom of expression as a weapon to infringe the fundamental rights of others. Ladies and gentlemen, hate speech is not free speech. Very few human rights are absolute. The prohibition against torture is among the small handful of exceptions. Balance is a foundational human rights concept. Very often, a fair and reasonable balance has to be struck between competing rights. In New Zealand, we are already very familiar with striking human rights balances between, for example, on the one hand, freedom of information, and on the other hand, the right to privacy. So in short, freedom of speech must not be used as a weapon against others. It has to be balanced with the right to enjoy a safe, secure, dignified life. And New Zealand should set the legal terms of this balance by way of an open, inclusive, constructive, respectful, democratic process. And having done that, then the courts have the difficult job to actually apply it, to strike this balance in appropriate cases as best they can. For some years, the Human Rights Commission has called for improved data collection on hate-motivated crimes. At present, we do not have in this country statistics about crimes that occur because of a person's religion, or colour, or race, or ethnicity, or other important personal characteristics such as sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. And without that sort of data, we do not know the scale and scope of the problem, and so we cannot design, implement, and evaluate an effective response. So it sounds rather techy and dull, but collection of the data is really important. We also need a thorough study on and a national plan of action against xenophobic extremism in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And by xenophobic, I mean an extreme fear of foreigners. To draw my remarks to a close, a few weeks ago, I was invited to speak at the commemoration of the Holocaust Remembrance Day. And with the Holocaust in mind, I argued that casual racism can lead to stereotyping. And stereotyping can lead to othering, that is, seeing other humans as somehow alien. And othering can lead to demonizing. And demonizing can lead to, and has led to, genocide. And I made those comments because I was speaking in the context of the Holocaust. Today, for current purposes, I want to revise those remarks. Yes, casual racism can lead to stereotyping. Stereotyping can lead to othering. Othering can lead to demonizing. And then we arrive at the 15th of March in Christchurch. We know from history that if you don't take casual racism seriously, if you don't take casual Islamophobia seriously, this can be cumulatively deeply constraining and offensive on individuals and communities. And I'm always reminded of Gulliver when he's washed up on the shores in Lilliput, and he finds himself strapped down by thousands of little ropes. That's what casual racism does. They're small. A rope in relation to Gulliver was small, but together he was constrained by little people. And that's what casual racism can do. But worse, in due course, casual racism can lead to the stereotyping, the othering, and the demonizing, and casual racism ends up having terrible, violent consequences on communities who are quietly, peacefully going about their daily lives. So it's absolutely imperative we give nothing to racism, as signalled in the Human Rights Commission's campaign, fronted by Taika Waititi, as well as some other wonderful New Zealanders. And it's imperative we give nothing to Islamophobia. But we have to go further. We need to grasp the rich diversity of New Zealand society. We need to look for ways to engage with people from other cultures, religions, and communities. At every chance, we must promote and we must maintain harmonious relations and ensure the protection of human rights for everyone. Join a community group and reach out in friendship to another community group with a different fabric to yours. New Zealand must become a global champion of anti-racism and anti-Islamophobia, and a champion of human rights for all. And in this way, we'll honor the victims of last week's shocking calamity. To our Muslim brothers and sisters, never forget that we stand by you, and we will do whatever we can to support you now and in the future. Maori kite rangi, ora kite whenua. Maori ora, kia tatou katoa. Salam alaikum.
Paul's happy to take a few questions. If anyone wants to say anything, has anyone got any questions?
Oh, he's offering to take it.
Kia ora. Thank you for your wonderful speech. I have a question. In the middle of your speech, you kind of alluded to the responsibility of transnational corporations. I wonder, probably you would have mentioned that in your part about poverty, but maybe you can allude a little bit to the connections of like systemic connections of poverty, racism, profit-driven market capitalism, how that creates racism.
Should we gather a few? Let's gather a few. Any gather?
Anyone got other questions they're interested in asking? Maybe gather a few and then sort of answer them at once.
Kia ora. I've got a couple of questions that would be useful to, I guess, reflect on. So I've got a couple of questions to maybe just reflect on. As a university, what supports or safe spaces do you have for students of colour to discuss issues around systemic racism, institutionalised racism, and kind of be able to talk and discuss these with those in power who may also perpetuate some of these ideals, maybe implicitly, and kind of discuss it without fear of repercussion, if that makes sense?
That was a fantastic question, and in fact, we've already been in discussion with OUSA about how we can keep the conversation going after this week. So one of the ideas that we've had is to actually have a panel discussion, possibly not next week, because I'm not sure people are going to be ready, but perhaps the following week, which would be a facilitated discussion with members of the university community who have particular academic expertise in some of these areas, but largely driven by questions from students. So not a talk at students, but rather providing some information that we can discuss with them. So that's one of the ideas that we've discussed so far about ongoing debate. From my perspective, the university is really interested in continuing to wrap our arms around people right now, but we can't let it end. So collectively, we need to think about what happens next. And our biggest contribution will be in having these very difficult conversations. That's what we do. So I would encourage you to touch base with OUSA and the Muslim Students Association as we begin our planning for continuing the conversation, because for me, I think that's where it really starts. So I welcome your question. We've got some ideas about how to move forward, but I suspect that many of the other ideas and the best ideas will come from students and staff themselves. So it's in the front of our mind. Right now, we're trying to get through the next couple of weeks. So in the meantime, look after each other, and then be prepared for the intellectual debate that, from my perspective, really must follow.
Thank you. Kia ora, Paul. Just a question. You've been talking about state leadership and political leadership in terms of ensuring the provision of or access to fundamental human rights for everyone in our community. And I just wondered if you had any comments around how it's possible to do that without honouring the treaty of honouring Te Tiriti o Waitangi, not the Treaty of Waitangi, but Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Thank you.
Thanks for the questions. I think two are directed to me, and I won't be able to give complete questions in the short time available. They're really good questions. Can I just make a few remarks, and then perhaps there'll be another occasion when we can explore them in more detail. The first question, can I contextualize the question, if I may? 1945, end of the Second World War. For the first time, you have a world organization established which has in its fundamental purposes human rights. First time, UN Charter, there we are in Article 1, talks about human rights. That was in the shadow of the Second World War. And when they then drafted at that time what the human rights catalogue would be, they came up with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as you know, in 1948. Now, the critical feature, one of the critical features of that Universal Declaration of Human Rights is that it's holistic. Remember in my remarks, I talked about a holistic approach to human rights. There you have it, back in 1948, a holistic approach to human rights, civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. Now, as we know, in 1945, In 1948, around then, the Cold War began to set in, and it sort of paralyzed discussion, including about social rights, it paralyzed discussion about the right to an adequate standard of living, the right to a basic home, the right to reasonable, accessible education, and so forth and so on. And it became really difficult to have a discussion about those social rights during the Cold War. And then Cold War came to an end, but what happened? There we had a reaffirmation of the holistic approach to human rights, which I think is critically important, but that holistic approach sort of stepped out of the Cold War into the environment of economic neoliberalism. And economic neoliberalism is not very hospitable to social rights. So out of the fire, social rights were into the frying pan. And now, I think, in the last 10 years, there's some shifting of the geopolitical plates and some shifting of ideas, and I think now there's a greater opportunity to reclaim that holistic vision of human rights that was there back in 1945 through to 1948, and we lost sight of it for some 60 years or so. And I think that holistic vision is really important. The founders of the Charter and the writers of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights knew there had to be a holistic approach to human rights because they wanted to address not just fascism, but the causes of fascism. And what were the causes of fascism? Growing inequalities. They included growing inequalities and poverty. So they knew in that time that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights had to be holistic, and it is. And that's why you've got economic, social, cultural rights there as well as civil and political rights. And I think the great challenge today, one of the great challenges today, is to reclaim that holistic vision of human rights. And you might think I'm politically naive, but I think that holistic vision of human rights can be achieved through different economic systems. Some economic systems will not deliver economic, social, cultural rights, but I think there is not just one choice by way of economic system which can deliver this holistic vision. There are a number of different economic systems that can do that, and it's up to a country to decide which system they choose. The critical thing is, whatever they choose, it's got to be a democratic process, and it's got to get there. It's got to get to the realization of a holistic understanding of human rights. So, a long answer to your question, but there we are. The second point, if I may, perhaps I didn't get it as clearly as I should have done. But it seems to me that there are some critically important documents if we're committed to, as we are, Indigenous people's rights. One critically important document is the Declaration of 1835. Another critically important document is the Treaty of Waitangi. Another critically important document is the one of the last 10 years ago, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And I think those three documents provide the foundation on which to construct multiculturalism.
Kia ora anō tātou. When I saw my name on the list of people who'd be speaking today, I got a bit of a shock. And I wasn't really sure what I was going to say. And I thought I needed to obviously to focus on the university, because that's what this is about. We're launching this campaign here at the university. But I can't really do that without firstly acknowledging what happened on Friday, like as others have. I can't pretend that that's not sitting with all of us here now, because it is. We go to Māori funerals, tangi, all over the country, and often you'll hear the same words. In Māori, they say, kua heke te kāpua pauri, ki runga ia tātou. The clouds of sadness have descended on us. Usually it's said to the grieving whānau of the person who's passed away. The clouds of sadness have descended upon us. I think it's a really fitting description of the national sense of grief that we're all feeling. and all experiencing as a result of what happened last week. The responses to what happened have been manifold and profound. Personally, one of the most profound comments I've heard was actually Friday afternoon, as the enormity of this atrocity was unfolding. It was Hata, who was standing there and shook his head, and he said, while they were having a karakia, while they were praying. It still sits with me. Some of the responses, though, I've got to say, have been quite hard to take. That's not us. Talk about our loss of innocence, and as the Vice-Chancellor, I think, so succinctly put it yesterday in an email to me, she said, we were never innocent, we were blind. Some of you know the local history of this wonderful place we live in, Dunedin, and some of you will know some of the Māori history. Many of you may have been out to a marae o Otago or Puketeraki. Some of you have commented on the beauty of the place. But there's another history that some of you may not know. Our marae, and I'll just speak for our marae o Otago, we've been the target of numerous racist attacks over the years. From having nigger painted on our buildings to arson attempts, one of which resulted in us having to employ security, and we've still got them, a security company, alarms and sprinklers. There's a marae just over in the Kaikarai Valley called Arai Turu that was burnt to the ground in a racist arson attack. A marae in Invercargill that was burnt down 3 times. Once initially, and then 2 of the rebuilds. The day after the Ngāi Tahu settlement claim was signed in 1997, the building here in Dunedin housing the Ngāi Tahu Māori Law Centre and the Ngāi Tahu Environmental Agency was burnt to the ground in an arson attack. And then on a much more personal level, there's my stepson, whose father's a tūhoi, who's now 30, but when he was aged 9, his mother found him in the bathroom trying to scrub the brown off because he didn't want to be called a nigger at school anymore. And talk to our Pacific relations about their experiences. Talk to our students, Māori, Pacific, Asian, they'll all give you recent examples and experiences of racism they have faced. Go anywhere around the country, any marae, any Māori community, any Pacific community, and they will have their own stories to tell. Muslim communities, Asian, any community will have similar experiences to share. So yes, this is us. But we don't want it to be anymore. And it won't be if we take action. This campaign is one step towards the future that we want. By challenging us all to speak up and stand up when we see racism in its many forms. It is a small but important step. As Harleen has mentioned, we also need to be asking the broader questions. Maybe direct some of our enormous research power into answering some of these questions. Why Dunedin? Why Dunedin? What is it about this city that led a right-wing lunatic, psychopath, to think that he'd be more at home here than in another city in New Zealand? Is it the prevalence of monuments to our white colonist history? When we look around, including Wellington and Christchurch, what do we see that sends clear messages that we value and respect and welcome ethnic, religious and other diversity? I know and I can assure you that these questions are being asked within the highest levels of this university. So please know that this campaign is a part of a much greater whole. And part of that will be looking at our spaces and places and how we promote and show our commitment to inclusivity and diversity. So before I mentioned the saying, ko heke te kapua pauri, just so you know, we don't leave them there. We don't leave them in the clouds of sadness. The other part of that is we then say, mā te wā, ka whiti mai te rā anō, whakapiripiri koutou ia koutou. That is, stick together, and in time, the sun will once again shine on us and on you. And just as it's the action of the wind that parts those clouds and allows the sun to shine, it'll be the action of people, of us and others, who part those clouds and lead us all towards the future that we want for our children and our grandchildren. Anō reira ko mutu tēnei. That's all I'd like to say, and I'd now like to invite our karaua hata to finish off our hui with a karakia. Kia koe hata.
Kia rohi hui anō tāta. O tira kia whakarite hia rā tātā tau hui i roto nei te karakia nō reira kia inoia ki tāta. E hua te matua te tama te wairua tapu e tuku whakamuimi te atuna kia koe mō tēnei hui hui nā mātau i tēnei rā. Nō reira nā kupu kōrero i whakatakotohia i tēnei rā e tō mātau atu. I roto rā i te whatu mana o tēnā o mātau e tō mātau atu. Ani rā ki hai ki nā kupu kōrero i kōrero hia kēnei kai raro i te kapua pauri i tēnei o. Nō reira kai tara mai tunu nei te mutuna o tēnei rā e tō mātau atua ki muna rā e nā hua tana katoa e pāna ki tēnei kapua e tō mātau atua. Nō reira kai te inoi kai te tani tuna tu kia koe kia rahi ia mai mātau kai roto i tēnei āhua tana e tō mātau atua. Ki nā mamai kai roto rai tēnā o mātau e tō mātau atua. Maura o e nei e wete atu e tō mātau atua. Kia eke ai mātau kuna ki te pai e tō mātau atua. Koe ni rā kai inu e atu kia koe ki haere tonu koe ki mua ki muri ki nā taho mātau hai arahi hai tauto. E hua whakapū mautia mai tau māramatana me tau whakaorana kia mātau i tēnei rā. Nā te mea hanga nāu te rani me te whenua whakapāhoana tau wairua ki noi te kare o nā wai kā ki koe kia mārama nā ka mārama. I muri ka hanga e koe te tanata ki ari te kia koe te ahua nō reira ka putata manaki kia hua kia tini kia kapi te whenua i a kōru. A hei rana tira kōrua mō nā mea katoa i te whenua. A ki hei māu tāua whakaora nā taino mai ni ki tēnei rā. Ko ia no iri tei te kupu whakarite o tirae kore puta mai te ora na mate ino i anaki mate no hopuku. Ai rā manaki se mai mātau e i huai tēnei rā. Gloria ki toi noa tapu. Amen.